welcome everyone to today's webinar for Cuez. Today is the second webinar that we will be doing. So a couple of weeks ago, we had our very first Cuez webinar, which handled the bit of Cuez in general, all the basics for Cuez. And today we will dive a bit deeper into how you can customize your own Cuez project, which we will do in a couple different ways. Perfect. Thank you, Eleanor, for confirming as well. Very nice. So let me start this as a slideshow. There we go. So a couple of the topics that we will be discussing today is block templates or blocks, and in more detail, meaning which blocks you have when you first register in Cuez, as well as how you can customize those blocks and how you can create new custom blocks. We will also discuss how you can create your own columns. And lastly, how you can create a personal layout for everything in Cuez, which we can then use to print or save as PDF, for example. A small note is that during the webinar is being recorded. So afterwards, for everyone here that is registered, you should receive an email with a link to the recording so you can rewatch it later. And somewhere next week, normally, we will upload it to YouTube, same as we did with our previous webinar. So you will be able to watch the webinar from there as well. Meantime, hi, Ralston as well. If someone has questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I will check on the chat once in a while, but I will not do it too often to keep it a nice continuous explanation. But do put your questions there, and I will come back to them at certain points. So one of the first topics we will discuss is customizing the block templates. For those of you that already registered in Cuez, you will know that you start a new project with a couple of default blocks already that you can start playing around with. For those that missed the last webinar or that are new to Cuez, blocks are the basic building blocks that you will use to build your script and rundown. So the blocks that you use to add presentation text, clips, graphics, lower thirds, things like that. So you will always start with a couple default blocks, which you can then start customizing. Or you can create your own custom block templates that you can then fill up with all of the specific fields that you need. And I will also show you that we have a couple of examples in our help center to, again, help you get started or to give you some inspiration to then create your own custom blocks from there. Afterwards, with our columns, we will also discuss the notes columns that you get by default and how to create your own columns or how to customize the existing ones. And then lastly, we will talk about how you can switch layouts, which layouts are available, and how to arrange columns, show and hide columns, and so on, to create your own view to then use in printing and PDF. So let me switch screens here to my Cuez screen. That should be this one. There we go. Let me quickly check the chat in the meantime. Jason, I see you found the full screen one. Perfect. Hi, Dilip as well. Perfect. So what we have here in front of us is a new project that I created earlier today to really start from scratch the way most of you will do as well. Some of you, from the names that I recognize, I know you registered a couple of weeks or months ago, so your starting point might have looked a little bit different. But for anyone that newly registers on Cuez since today, whenever you create a new project now in Cuez, we will have you start with a standard episode sample. And what's nice about this sample is that when we open it, you'll see that there are some example content in there already with different types of blocks and with some colors and so on to give you a nice starting point so you can start exploring from here. Now, as we discussed a couple of weeks ago, and most of you will know, the blocks are the building blocks that you will use to create your script and rundown. We have two main types of blocks. So if I click my plus button here, for example, I get my drop-down menu where I can select the different types of blocks that I have available. In my new project, I see some blocks that have the letter T in front and some with a Q in front. The ones with the letter T are what we call text blocks. And text blocks, if I scroll down a little bit, you see a couple examples here. Text blocks are what you will use to enter any sort of presentation text. That could be text that you want to have go to a prompting system, text that needs to go to a tablet. Maybe you want to split up your text, everything for presenter A in one color, everything for presenter B in another color. Things like that you can do with text blocks, which we will explain a bit more in a moment. And the other type are the Q blocks. And the Q blocks are the more technical blocks. So that means blocks that you can use for clips, graphics, audio, lower thirds, but also things like indicating when it's a live segment or a commercial break or a call via Zoom, for example. All of those things you can do with Q blocks. And those you will mostly use on the rundown side of your episode. And yeah, those have a lot more options in the configuration, which we'll talk about in a moment as well. Now, where do we start? So at the very top here with the 3 dots in the top of our episode, we can open our menu and we go to Manage Block Templates. From here, we get an overview of all of the blocks that we have currently available in our project. We see again our text blocks and we see below that our Q blocks. First of all, with the dots here in the front, the 6 dots in front of each block, you can drag them and move them into a different position. So if you want to position your blocks in this menu here in a different order, then you can do that from that block template manager. Small tip there would be the blocks that you use the most often, put those at the very top, and then the ones you use the least, put them at the bottom, so that the ones you use the most are the most readily available, of course. Now, from there, if we start with our text blocks, so one example is the prompter block. This one is called prompter by default, but if you want, you can rename this to be presenter or host or whichever name you want to give it that makes sense in your specific project. But the principle is always the same, meaning that this is the place where you can enter the presentation text for the host of the show, for example. Now, if we want to edit our existing block, we can go here to the back, click our action menu, and go to Edit Block Template. From here, we can click the name of the block, from where we can give it a different name. So if I want to name it presenter, I can do so. I can also change the color. So currently this is a light blue color, but I can choose any other color here that I want. And what's very important is I can choose whether or not I want to see that name in a little badge in my script. A badge, if I quickly close this, the badge is what you see here. So I have my presenter indicator here at the top, same for my audio cue block, my tablet text block, and so on. So there might be certain block types that you want to create that do not have that badge visible. So you can do that by disabling this little checkbox here. Now, once your name and colors is all the way you like it, then you can start focusing on the actual text block that is inside. So one main difference between a text block and a cue block is that a text block will always have one single field being a text area, because that's where you put your text. We can edit this text area and we can give it a default style if we want. So maybe we want certain text to always be in bold or italics. Maybe we want it always to be in uppercase, or we might want to give it a background color or a text color. This can be nice in an example that we'll look at in a moment. Maybe you want certain instructions or stage instructions, and you want to indicate them in red or orange, something that really pops and grabs attention. Then you can give that block a default style, meaning that whenever you start typing in that specific block, it will always be in that red or orange color in that case. This checkbox here below is a very important one as well. So for text blocks, as well as our cue blocks in a moment, you will have the option to include them in timings. Now, as we briefly saw a couple of weeks ago in the previous webinar, Cuez can calculate estimated durations for you automatically. So if I quickly click my plus button here at the top and show my timing column, I see here that I have a column with my estimated durations, and my presenter text here, for example, this is calculated automatically by Cuez, saying that this would take 16 seconds to read. And this is based on the amount of text I have here in my text block. So if you want Cuez to calculate that duration automatically for you, you have to make sure that you enable the checkbox include content in timings. Quickly check if there's any questions about this one already. That's all good. Yeah, so for you, Eleanor, because you use Tinkerlist, Cuez is the new platform that we just released. So what you see here today is in the new platform, not in Tinkerlist. So do keep that in mind. We have not shown you a lot of Cuez yet, so most of what you see here today will probably be very new for you. So this is our presenter block. The same can be done with our tablet, of course, and with our instructions. So presenter and tablet, I think that's quite self-explanatory. But if we look at our instructions, what can we do with an instruction block? So if we look at our configuration, I see that by default, this block has a red color and does not show a badge. If we look at our configuration of our text, we see that we have chosen to have our text be in uppercase and to have that be a red text color. If I want, I can also make it bold. And actually, seeing that this is an instruction, something like applause, for example, I might not care too much about including it in timings, because that's an instruction, not text that needs to be read. So I'm going to uncheck my box. I can then save. And if we close this, if I now go here at the very top and add a new instruction block, I see my block here and I can say applause, for example. If we do that as an example here in the middle of our presentation text, maybe in between the two pieces of text for my presenter, I want my applause instruction or any other instruction that you want to give to the audience, to your host, to your guests. You can add it like this. It's nice and compact. You don't see the extra badge, but you just see the instruction that you are giving. Then, if we then create an extra text block, we can go to create block template here at the top. And first of all, we can give it a name. So besides our normal instructions, maybe we also want to create stage instructions. So indicate to our host, is this a segment that will happen at the desk, on the sofa, on an external stage, wherever it may be. So we can name it stage instructions. I can already pick my color. We have a red instructions block, so maybe let's pick dark orange or deep orange for this one. I do want to see the badge for that one in my script. And now we can select, am I going to create a text block or a cue block? My stage instructions do not have any technical aspect to it. This is simply an instruction. So I'm going to create that as a simple text block. I'm going to create my block. And I now have the same pop-up that we saw earlier, where again, I can dive in and make more changes as needed. I'm going to do that because again, my stage instruction, for me, that does not matter for my timings. So I'm going to disable it. And maybe again, I want to put it in italics, but we'll leave the color as is. I can save, close. And now what I can do is at the very beginning of each segment, I can add my stage instructions. And I can say here, oh, sorry, I put it at the bottom. I can say here, this would happen at the desk, for example. So very easy to add a block with stage instructions or with normal instructions to then start using to add more information to your script. Let's go back to our block template manager for a last example. If we have multiple presenters in our show, we might want to make a clear difference in the blocks or the text for each presenter. If I want, I can then maybe rename my first block to presenter A, keep it in blue. Maybe I also want to put my text in a specific color, so let's put that also in blue. Save. To make my life easy, I can use my action menu to duplicate my presenter A block. And I can now rename this one to presenter B. Give it a different color. Let's make it teal, for example. And I'm also going to give my text that teal color like this and save. Oh, and of course, yeah, this one I want in my timings. There we go. And let's put it underneath our presenter A. So like this, we see immediately that our presenter A block has changed in the background. The name has changed and the text color has changed. And I can now also add my presenter B text block where I can type my text as well in that specific color. So that makes it easy for your presenters to see which text is for which presenter, for example. What then might also help in this specific example for presenters is that with the filter icon here at the top, I can filter and I can say, okay, I only want to see my presentation text if I am presenter A, for example, then I can make those choices as well. Quickly check if there are any new questions. And no, all good so far. Perfect. So like this, again, you can create as many of these text blocks as you want, of course, to make the differences that you always know what that text refers to, whether it's presentation, tablet, some sort of instructions. You can create as many of these blocks as you want. Then, if we move on to cue blocks, for that, I'll switch to my rundown side. I do see them on my script side here as well. But on my rundown, if I unfold my entire rundown, I see just cue blocks, no text blocks. So here we see as a starting point, I have a live block, a graphic block, a clip, a strap, an audio block, and so on. So a very good starting point for my project. But again, from here, I can start customizing, of course. If we dive into our clip block, we see that in a cue block, you have a lot more options. You are not limited to simply a text field, the way you are in a text block. But here, you have actually the choice between 4 different types of fields that you can add. We have a plain text field, which is a single line of text, which is perfect for something like a title or maybe even last words of a video clip, because that's usually quite short as well. We have a text area, which can hold multiple lines of text. You can also apply formatting, so you can put text in bold, give it a color. A good example of this one, which we'll add in a moment, will be a text box for voiceover text to go with your video clip, for example. We also have a label field, which acts as a drop-down menu. I'll show that in a moment as well. And we have a media field, so that in the example of a video clip, a graphic, or an audio card, for example, we can add media fields so we can actually upload media files as well. So our title, quite straightforward. This is just a simple field. We don't have any specific style applied to it. If you want, you could put it in bold or give it a color if you want, of course. You can also give it a default value. Maybe you want your clip titles to always start with a certain prefix or something, then you can do that as well. For most field types, you can then also choose how you want to display them in your rundown or in your script. So by default, Cuez will always try to keep your rundown compact and put all fields in one single line. But if you want, you can organize them so that certain fields will go on their own separate row. So if I want my title to always appear in a separate row, I simply check the box, save my changes, and that will apply here in the background. If we have a look at our media field, when we add a media field to a block, we can choose what type of media this block will hold, whether that is going to be video, images, or audio files, for example. Depending on the choice you make, you might see more options as well to predefine certain aspect ratios, for example. Now, with our media field, again, very important is that you decide whether or not you want Cuez to use that in the automatic calculation for estimated durations. Because what is nice in this case is if I upload, for example, a 3-minute media or video file in my clip block, then Cuez will automatically enter those 3 minutes as an estimated duration. I can always override that as needed, of course, but Cuez will already fill out those 3 minutes to give you a starting point. If we look at our label field called sound in this example, so here we can create labels, which it's basically a drop-down menu with options that you can select. And the very first option is that you can also turn that into a multi-select so that you can select multiple options in one single field. And again, if you want to display that in its own separate row or not. we have two options available by default. So whether sound would be off for my video clip or if it would be on if it's a sound on tape in this example. We can add new options if we want to. So I see a new option 1. I can click on my 3 dots, give this a different name, and again I can choose text color or background color depending on the option I want to take. I can then save from this point and my new label option has been added. I also have a text field for my last words. Again, this is very simply a plain text field because it's going to hold just a couple of words or one single line of text. I could maybe put it in italics, give it a gray color just to have it be a little bit different. And maybe I always want to see it in a separate row. So I can save that one as well. But I still want to add a text box for my voiceover text. So I'm going to add a text area. We'll keep it simple and call it VO for voiceover. And again, I might want to have that in italics. I can choose a default field value, but in my example, that will not be necessary. So I'm going to leave this empty and add my field. In the background, we already see our field appear, our VO voiceover text field. If I don't want to see this by default in my rundown or in my script, I can use these little eye icons here at the front to hide certain fields. So I click it, and in the background, immediately you see that field disappear. If we go out of our manager, we confirm that indeed that field is no longer visible. But if I either double click on my block or go via the 6 dots to open my details here on the side, I will always have access to all of the fields that I have configured on my specific block. So this is really something that's going to be up to you for your specific project or your personal preference, which fields you want to see in your script or rundown, or which ones can stay hidden, but that you can still access via this details window, of course. Quickly checking the chat. Media files we upload are in low res or original res. So whenever you upload media files in Cuez, you can upload any quality or file type that you want. So we support most default file types. So for a video, even if you have a 4K or 8K resolution file, which can be MKV, MOV, something ProRes, whatever it is, you can upload it in Cuez. That is absolutely no problem. And we do actually suggest that you use the highest quality because one of the features that we will discuss in a webinar in a couple of weeks will be our automator, meaning that you can link Cuez to your playout hardware and software, such as vMix, for example. And if, of course, you want to play back your video file in the highest quality on your vMix, that means that you will have to upload that same quality video file here in Cuez. So that is an example of a clip block. We see here our label fields on my sound. I can easily click here. I see all of my options and I can switch to say that the sound would be off in this specific example. If we look at an example of my graphic block, I see that I have a label where I can choose my template. And the options I have here, again, by default, and I can add more options if I want to, is that I can switch between landscape or portrait. Again, if we think ahead towards playout devices, connecting it with our automator tool, this would allow you to perform separate actions on your playout software based on the fact if your graphic is portrait mode or landscape mode, for example. Now, if we go back into our block template manager, so you see that you have a clip, a graphic, an audio, and a strap, which are blocks that you will usually use quite a lot in your show. So go in here, adjust these as needed, give them a different name. Maybe you want to call it GFX, give it a different color, add fields, remove fields, hide fields. But go in there in that block template manager and customize these blocks the way they work for your exact project. If we have a look at a strap or lower third, depending on where you are from, then what we can do here is, of course, we see two fields here by default, a title and a description, or a subtitle, if you want to call it that. This is already a good starting point, but in certain straps or lower thirds, you might have a third field for a location. If you do a news show, for example, you might want to show the name of the journalist that is on location. You want to have a subtitle for the event that is happening and maybe a third line for the location of where that event is taking place. So I could add another plain text field. I can name it location. I'm just going to keep my default field styles, but again, I can change that if I want, of course. I can put on a different row. Let's maybe do that and add our fields. And we now have 3 fields available on our lower third card. So I see them here on my strap or lower third. I have title, description, and location that I can all use to just have that info in my script or rundown, or again, to later on send to certain software such as VisFlowX, Singular Live, or directly to vMix, for example. If we go back, we can even add more functionality to our strap that might be useful. We could add a label field. So if we go in and add a label field from scratch, we can call this one maybe type, and we can start adding options. Maybe my very first option or the option set that I want to create here is something that I could use to indicate if this is going to be a live segment or something exclusive or a replay that is happening. Something that you could use not necessarily as a lower third at the bottom of your screen, but as part of your overlay in the top right corner, for example. So these kinds of things you can also do with labels. So maybe I want to have a live option in yellow. Maybe I want to have a replay option. And let's make that, I don't know, blue, for example, or the blue color like this, and add our field. So immediately in the background, we see our new fields available, and I can set the type of my strap here, and I can use that then for my automation, for example. Quickly check if there's any other questions in the meantime. Is there a character limit on the straps? By default, no. So you can type as much information as you want at this moment. But of course, you would have to keep in mind that you will have certain limits in your Singular Live or VisFlowX that you might have to stick to. So do keep that in mind. But by default, currently, there are no settings to limit the amount of characters in your straps. Let me quickly see in my notes which other blocks we can discuss. But I think by now you probably get the principle that you can create text blocks and cue blocks however you may need them. An interesting one to have, but again, it will be available by default if you register a new project. For those that registered before today, you might have to create this one manually. But something like a break cue block can also be interesting, so that at the end of a certain item or a part in your episode, you can add a very simple break block to indicate a break or a commercial break, whatever it may be. And you can then again style that, of course. I personally like to put that in bold and follow the same color as my badge. Oh, sorry, the text color in this case as my badge. Save it. And that way, again, when I add my break block, so here I see that I have a break, and that's all in red and in bold in this case. And yeah, like that, again, you can add as many of these blocks as you want, whichever is useful for you. If you do conferences or events, a call block can come very handy, where you have a label field to indicate, is that going to happen over Zoom, over Skype, or any other option that you want to make available. You can add a field to paste the link, so you can put the Zoom link in there in that card immediately as well. Whichever field you need for your specific type of project, you can create it here. If you are into esports, if you make esports productions, you might want to make a block for a game, so you can clearly indicate when a game will happen. If you do news, you might want to indicate certain different events. So you can really customize cues to your specific needs. Let me quickly check the questions again. Can we see a preview of the media which we are going to upload? So whenever you click here on one of these thumbnails, so maybe for a clip card, when you click the media thumbnail, you will get the pop-up from your computer, so from the Mac Finder or the Windows Explorer, where you can see your media. Then if you see the preview there already or not, that will depend on the configuration of your computer. But then once you upload the media, it will start uploading, and you will always see a small thumbnail here on the block itself. And if you double click to open the side panel, you will see a bit of a bigger view here on the side panel as well. Or you can click that media file and then it will open in full screen, or depending on the size of the media that you uploaded, so you can see it from within Cuez as well. And the other question, we can bring in presenters using Cuez. I'm not sure I understand the question completely, Eleanor, but you could have presenters also access Cuez to read your presentation text. And as we mentioned in the previous webinar, we have a share button here in the top right where you can access a public share link that you can then share with your presenters. And in that share link, which is new to what you are used to from Tinkerlist, in that share link, you can switch between a compact rundown view, a more expanded script view, or even a tablet view. And in those three views, you can filter the blocks that need to be visible. So if you want to send a link to an episode to one of your presenters, they can then filter their view to only see, for example, presenter B, if they are presenter B in that case, and just focus on their text via that shared link. Ralston, can we populate the fields from a Google Sheet? Currently, no. So currently, all of the information needs to come in here. You have to type it or copy paste it manually. But yeah, depending on what type of content you work with and which hardware or software. For example, I know in VisFlowix, you can link that to a Google Sheet. So depending exactly on what you are trying to do, you could link your Google Sheet in Flowix itself, and then just create a Q block in Cuez that you will use as a trigger to trigger information in VisFlowix. But again, that kind of depends on what exactly you are trying to achieve, of course. And Jessica, does everyone get the same view of the rundown unless they choose to customize it? A very good question. And that is, well, that was going to be part 3, but I'll already jump into that. So what we have in front of us by default is what we call a side-by-side or a hybrid view, meaning that on the left-hand side, we see the rundown view of our episode, which you can make very compact by collapsing everything. And on the right-hand side, we see the more expanded script view, which shows by default everything, including your presentation text. From there, if we look in the top left corner, you can switch your layout to only have a script view or to only have a rundown view. So that is already a first option that you have to customize the view to your specific needs. If you do that, if you switch the view, that only affects what you see when you are logged in. If you are a team of multiple people, if you change your view, that does not affect what your team members see. So everyone can create their own personal view in that case. Then, in both your rundown as well as the script side of the episode, you will see that there is this eye icon where you can filter which blocks you want to see. On the rundown side, that is all of your Q blocks. And on the script side, that will be all of your text blocks and Q blocks. So again, that is a choice that you can make that will affect what you see on your screen, but that will not affect your colleagues in your team. The next step, and for that, I'll maybe switch to, let's take a rundown view. But again, this is possible in both rundown and script view. On the top right corner of that specific view, we have the plus button. And if we click here, we can choose to show or hide certain columns. Now, I'm going to skip the first two for a moment and focus on these 4 here below. Again, if you already registered on Cuez before today or yesterday, you will have the notes column there by default. If starting today you register a new project, you will see these 4 columns available immediately. But these are different types of notes columns that you can make available in your episode. So maybe you have different specific audio notes or graphic notes that you want to add to your episode. So in an item, I can say, okay, maybe my opening item for some reason need to use a 57% volume, a 75% volume or something. I can add that in my audio column. If I need to add more information about my graphics, something that I didn't put on my graphics block, for example, then I can add that in my graphic notes column as well. Besides the columns that you have available by default, you can also choose to add extra columns. So you can create your own columns however you may need them. You can do that either the way we are doing now via the plus button and then going to add columns, or if we go to our action menu in the top left, we also see here manage columns. They both bring you to the same window. We see the columns we have currently available. At the back, we have an action menu where we can edit an existing column. We can also archive and delete from here. And I did not show that, but for your blocks, that works the same way. We also have our action menu where we can duplicate or archive. If you have blocks that you no longer want, you can archive them and they will be available in the archived section. But so for our columns, that works in the exact same way. For the columns that you have available by default, I can go in and edit. I can change the name if I want. And again, I can change the style of my column and I can add default cell values. So if I want my notes to always be in italic and in a gray color, I can put it like that. My audio notes, maybe that's a Tinkerlist thing, but for me, I associate audio with an orange color. So I like to go in here and put the text color to orange in this case for my audio. And my graphics I associate with green. So I'm going to go in and put that on a green color and save that one as well. Now, this is completely up to you, of course, because it can turn into a little bit of a coloring book. So tread lightly with all these colors, but it can really help. So now immediately I see there's something here in orange. I don't even need to see the header. I see orange. For me, that means audio. And here, if I just type graphics, I see that in green. So I immediately know these are graphics nodes. So I can go in and customize these however I may need them. What's also nice is that you can drag these columns around to put them in a different order. So in this show height column section, they will always be ordered alphabetically, but in your specific view, you can drag these around to really show them in the order that you may want to see them. The same goes if we add our timing columns. So if I'm going to enable my timings, by default, Cuez is going to show you the estimated duration and the front time, but we have 8 different timings available by default. So yeah, it doesn't matter which ones you want to show or hide in your view. These will become available. And yeah, if you want estimated duration to be at the front, just grab this one, drag it to the front, and organize the columns the way they work for you. Again, that only affects what you see on your screen. Everyone else can personalize their view for their specific needs. The notes columns, you can also make them wider and smaller. So if you know, for example, audio, if it's only going to be something like volumes in percentages, you can make that column quite narrow so it doesn't take up too much space. Now, besides creating your own custom view to use in Cuez itself, which is going to be your main working point of view, but you can also use this to create your print or PDF from an episode. Because in Cuez, the way printing works is we use the what you see is what you get method, which means exactly what the words say. You create the view however you want, and when you then either press Command P or Control P on your keyboard, or you go into the action menu and you press print here at the top, this is then the view that will be created. I'm actually not sure if this is shared in the webinar. Hopefully it is. But that is then the view that is created for your print or where you can save as PDF. You can still switch between landscape and portrait, but of course, if you have multiple columns, you might want to stick to landscape. And under more settings, you can also play around with margins to put these. I had them on minimum for some reason. So if we switch back to default, you see that you have some margins. In my case, yeah, I had added a little bit too much information. So I see that part of it is off of the page. So I could go in and change my view. So if I want to make my first column here a little bit more narrow, again, I can go in, check if everything is a better fit at this point. I still have to make some columns smaller, but I can customize my view to make sure that everything fits the way I need it. So let me see if that one, if you create your own column, does that become a template for every episode? Yes, so if you create new notes columns, so creating new columns as well as new blocks from the block template manager, if you create new blocks and columns, they will always be available on the project level. So in this case, I am in my standard episode sample, but if I were to create a new episode, I will have access to those same block templates and those same columns by default. Absolutely, yeah. Let me check which other questions. Jason, can we play these elements from this platform with Cuez, or do we need multiple windows open to see rundown and play cards? If I understand that question correctly, then you are talking about when you want to automate Cuez by linking it to vMix, for example. For that, thank you for confirming. For that, we have a separate tool called the Automator, which we will discuss in a couple of weeks in a separate webinar. But in Cuez, you will also already find an Automator button since this morning. So you can already find some information there, but that is in a separate Automator tool where you have your exact rundown again, but they act as triggers. So each item or block is a trigger that you can click to perform an action on your vMix in that case. And let me see the last question. I create a script and rundown using slide numbers. Do we have slides on this? So indeed, Eleanor, I know you guys use a lot of slides. So by default, there is no Q block called slides, but you can perfectly go into your block template manager, create a new block template, which would be of the Q block type. You can call it slides. I don't remember which color you use in your project, but for this one, I'm just going to make it cyan and create my block. By default, I'm going to want a title in there, of course. But if you want to upload your slides as an image, you're going to add a media field. Call this one slide as well. That is going to be of the image type. I have a couple more options here, so I can set aspect ratios, for example. Add my field, and depending on how much information you want to add in your block, this could already be it. And just a simple slide block with a title and a media field. So if I go to the bottom and add my new slide block that I have available, I now see that block with my title, and I can add my media to it immediately as well. So again, you can really customize all of that the way you need, depending on which fields you need or which blocks you need. For you, indeed, Eleanor, the naming Cuez might be a little bit confusing. That's what I was expecting when I saw your name in the registration for today. When you are working with Tinkerlist, our Automator app back then was called Cuez, but that is now the Automator app, and our new platform that will eventually replace Tinkerlist is called Cuez, indeed. For you, a tiny bit confusing, I can imagine. And Jessica, let me quickly see. Is the Automator compatible with platforms other than vMix? Yes, absolutely. So we this morning, we published a couple articles about the Automator already in our help center. So when you are, let me go back to Cuez here. In the bottom right corner, you see this blue button, which is our intercom chat button. From here, you can always get some suggested articles, and you see there's one that will help you create custom block templates, for example. You can always send us a message, as some of you already know. But from here, you also have access to the Help Center, where, so Jessica, I'm going to focus on your question. We have here modules, automation, and there's a couple articles in here already. Some of these will mention a bit more information about hardware and software that we already support, but that is not a full list yet, because we are currently at, 2025 different pieces of hardware and software. And every couple days or every week, we add new ones to that list. So yeah, just let us know which hardware and software you use. So that counts for everyone here in the webinar today. Send us a message via that blue button in the bottom right corner. Let us know which hardware and software you use, and then we can let you know if we already support it, in which case we can give you a demo/workshop. And if we do not support it yet, then we add it to our list to investigate and to add as soon as possible. But to give you a couple examples, we can already integrate with vMix, TriCaster, EVS, VisFlowX, Singular Live, OBS, and many, many more. So do let us know. Feel free to contact us for more information about that. But yeah, for today, so if I quickly go back to my hybrid view, my side-by-side view, so we discussed the different types of blocks you have available, how you can create your own custom blocks, or how you can customize the blocks that you have available by default. Again, for that, we have some examples in our Help Center. So if you go to the section about Cuez episodes, all the way at the bottom, we have block template examples, which we categorized. So if the productions you do have to do with talk show, go in here, see which block templates we suggest in that case. Again, these are suggestions to give you a starting point. If you do esports, sports, events, and so on, we have multiple examples here to give you a good starting point. If you need more inspiration or if you have specific questions, send us a chat message and we will gladly help you with that as well. Besides the blocks, we saw the columns, how you can enable and disable them, and how you can create and customize your own columns. And lastly, or what we did in the second place actually, was how to customize the view to your specific needs, which you can then use for printing or saving as PDF. From my part, that is it for this webinar for today. So again, I'll check the last questions in a moment. For those who missed the previous webinar, do go to our YouTube channel or via the Help Center. We have a full section with training videos, which also includes a recording of the previous webinar. So you can watch the previous one to get a bit more info about Cuez in general. And then after this one, I believe the next one on the list will be about timings. So we'll do a deep dive into timings, how they all work, how you can customize them, and so on. And the one after that, if I am correct, will be about the automator, for which we will have our CEO and Chief Tinkerer, Eric, join. He will give all of the details and tips and tricks about how we can connect Cuez with our automator app, from which we can then link with different pieces of hardware and software. Let me quickly check again for the questions. So Eleanor, the link to the first webinar, I will send you that after this one. But if you go on YouTube, if you just Google YouTube Tinkerlist, you will already end up on our YouTube channel where you can find it. I believe it's not the latest video, but the one just before that. But I will send you the link in a moment, no worries. And for Jessica, is it possible to create templates that include the same assets? We do a recurring show every 2 weeks that include the same graphics and open video. So a very good question, actually. So that was indeed briefly mentioned in the very first webinar. We don't yet have our episode templates finished, but in a couple of weeks, we hope to release that as well. But what you can currently already do is you can create a first episode, which would act as your episode template. In there, just add all of the different blocks that you will need in each of your episodes of your show. You can upload the media in every block, or text as well, of course. And whenever you want to create a new episode, instead of creating new episodes, you can just go in the action menu and duplicate the one that you are using as a template. So it's kind of a workaround at the moment, but again, in a couple of weeks, we will have our templating feature finished, meaning that you can really create episode templates that when you create a new episode, you can choose the template that you want to use at that point. But the workaround should already work at the moment as well. I hope that one answers. Yeah, perfect. Very good. So yeah, if there are no other questions, I thank you all for being here today and asking questions. That's a little bit more entertaining for me as well, instead of only talking. Again, when the webinar is finished, you should a little bit later receive a link with a recording to this specific webinar. And somewhere next week, normally we will upload this one to YouTube as well and add it to our training videos in the Help Center. So you can always review the videos and the webinar from there as well. If there are any questions afterwards, feel free to contact us via the chat or send us an email and we will happily help you out. Okay, have a fine rest of the day or evening, depending which time zone you are in. And we will see you in the next webinar. Bye-bye.